Hello. This week, if you have looked at your readings, maybe some of you have already done them, you'll see that you have two academic studies, two research articles, like the type of things that we try to write when we're not busy teaching. And I usually don't like to assign two academic articles in the same week because I do know that they're a little thicker to read, that they take a little bit more time, and if you're not familiar with them, well, even if you are familiar with them, they might come across as overly dry. Um, Having said that, I think it's really good practice to read these things, and I really want you guys to see how what research on people's social media habits looks like. And these studies that you got this week gives you a nice little diverse taste of that because you have this more qualitative study where they're interviewing people and really trying to get some qualitative data on uh, why people do what they do on Twitter. And then you had a more empirical study where people are being surveyed. Sorry, not empirical, I shouldn't say that. A more quantitative study where you had people being interviewed about their perceptions of different types of social norms on different types of social network site platforms. And for what it's worth, again, I know that, again, two academic articles in a week is a little thicker than I usually lay it on, but don't forget that for the last few weeks of the semester, you're going to be able to read this lovely little popular press book that, although there's a lot of words in it, I will say this academic has a much more approachable writing style, so hopefully that'll make up for it a little bit. Anyway, actually, the reason I was bringing up those readings is because I'm not going to talk about them a lot. I try to keep these videos 20 minutes or less, and there is some stuff that will overlap with what I do want to say in those readings, but for the most part, not all of it, but for the most part, you're going to be on your own with them. The only thing I'll say is that when I assign these academic articles, I do understand that most of you haven't had statistics, or if you have, maybe it's been a while, and maybe you haven't had the type of statistics and things that are in some of these studies. So I'm not, when you're reading those types of articles, I really just want you to try to focus on what's the take-home message with these studies? Like, what are their main conclusions and how do they make sense of them? So hopefully that can narrow things down for you a little bit. In other words, you can kind of read the results section with a grain of salt. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. And this week, I actually wanted to talk to you about some, I would say, more practical things that I don't have readings on. And the reason I don't have readings on them is because I made it up. Sort of. No, really. Actually, in an advanced social media class I took a little while ago, I worked with some of my students to collect some of the knowledge that we had read throughout the semester and try to formulate what we think are tips for best practices on social media, all social media, all different types of platforms, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever. And we came up with you'll see it in your, I've got the syllabus there. We have this little handy little, what is it, an acronym? Yeah, BRACE, BRACE. Tips to be likable, right? And we have quotes around like because we're thinking about like the types of likes you get on social media and everything. And so I just want to go over some of those tips. These are, Dr. Cohen's tips to be likable. Maybe I'll write a book, huh? And the reason I'm talking about them this week is because I do think that some of them, although not all of them, as maybe I'll mention sort of at the end, overlap with the readings you had this week, specifically about authenticity. So that's how I'm going to try to do this. I'm not going to focus a whole lot about the readings for the next few minutes. I just want to talk about these concepts that hopefully will help you in thinking about your own social media strategy, again, whether it's for your professional purposes or personal purposes. Before I go in, let me just say, a lot of this stuff is going to seem kind of self-explanatory, which I get. I find that a lot with communication things that you're like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. And yet, I hope that as I'm talking about these, you'll kind of say, I know people who don't do those, or I know people who don't do this, and maybe I'll give you some examples too. So even if this seems easy, and it should, and it makes sense, and it should, I think, let me just say, I think these are all things we shouldn't take for granted. Now, having said that, I see that I actually have them written on the board here. Can you see? Look up there. Yeah. Brevity, reciprocity, authenticity, consistency, and engagement. Do you see that? So that's it. Better than a PowerPoint. Brevity. Maybe I can. Let me see if I could prop this up somehow. No. No. Okay. Sorry. I'm not gonna. I was seeing if I could get something to hold my computer screen up like this. Oh well. Okay. So the first principle of being likable, and again, I think this applies to every social media platform, is brevity. Now, not all social media platforms give you the same options in terms of how much you can add. Twitter, for instance, used to only have like a limit of 140 characters, and it's expanded or whatever. But I think that even then, right, even though Twitter's expanded, the shorter you can make things generally, and there are some exceptions I'll talk about in a second, generally the better, and there has been some research to support this. Part of this has to do with information overload, right? When you post something, you want to be short about it. If you post a status update, right? If you post a picture and you want to caption it, normally you want to not write so much for a couple of reasons. First of all, the way that people use social media, the information overload issues, is that they're scrolling through things quickly, and if they see something that's really long, they're not going to want to read it. I mean, it's funny. This is something that's affected our news industries too. There was some interesting research about how most people, if you're reading an online news article, I'm going to mess up the statistics. If somebody's interested, though, email me and I'll find a link for you because I have some of my undergraduates read it. It's something like only 50% of people actually go further than like through the quarter of an article or something. I mean, listen, in that case, they still write. We obviously still have longer articles, but the point is a lot, people aren't usually willing to invest a lot of time reading a lot of long things. So if you need to make a point, or if you're just trying to get a good impression from people so that they'll like something, you want to make sure that you keep it simple. You don't say too much. My husband's don't show this video to anybody in my family, okay? I don't want to cause any strife, but my brother-in-law is a rabbi, and he often, we call him like the sermon poster. He'll go on Facebook and he will post a post that's so long that you actually have to click on it. Let me just open up so I see what you can see the best way to, that you actually have to click on it in order to read the whole thing. So like, let's say that, he had a picture or something, and he always has these nice, again, like sermons, like these nice things to say. He'll relate it to the Bible or like whatever, but the thing is like he writes and it's like a full paragraph, but you can see that like there's more, and you're gonna actually have to click on the post in order to read the rest of it, and then you click on the post and you see like paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, and it's like, my husband has told him, my husband who's like a journalist and is trying to cultivate everybody's strategy, he's like, shh, just restrict yourself, like resist the urge to keep posting, and don't post any more than above the content that you're actually posting when you're trying to put comments to it. I mean, that's Facebook, but I think this applies to a lot of things. I mean, especially considering that a lot of our social media is very visual, right? I mean, think about Instagram. Really, Instagram is all about the images too. You don't need to say a lot, but listen, having said that, I'll say this as well. I also think that these things apply to images too. People who post all of their vacation photos are not going to get a great response for it, for the same reason. It overwhelms people. If you've noticed, you are more likely to click on an album that says, how like you can see in some places that there's 10 pictures to look at versus 56. You won't even click on the albums with 56, or if you do, you'll only go through a few of them typically. Again, it all depends. I'm talking about trends here, but and the reason for that is because it is overwhelming, and because it doesn't look very curated. It doesn't look very cultivated. So again, keep it simple, keep it short. I did mention, though, there are some exceptions to this, and to be honest, there has been some research saying that in some circumstances, very long posts on different platforms do very well. I can only give you my expert opinion on this because I am not actually familiar with the research that would say why, but my hunch is it depends on the type of post too. If you are consistent with one of your articles, violating social norms and talking about something maybe more heartfelt or whatever, it's a little bit more acceptable to post something long. There's always exceptions. Also, if you don't do it Frequently, sometimes it helps posts stand out. Um, it helps posts stand out more, but in general, right, you can't be a repeat offender for the brevity principle, or that is not what I would recommend. So keep that in mind as just like one strategy to make yourself more likable. Okay, the next one down here, you can kind of see, we've actually already kind of talked about reciprocity a little bit. You will recall that social penetration theory, right, is all about reciprocity. If you tell a little bit about yourself, that makes more people more willing to say something more about themselves, and social penetration happens, right? You know, self-disclosure, reciprocity. But on social media, reciprocity is the name of the game. I've always wanted to do a study, though I have a lot of other studies I want to do, and it always seems to get pushed back. A study of actual reciprocity, about literally being able to predict with some probability indicator the likelihood that if you like somebody's post, that within the next 48 hours they will like something of yours, right? Part of this, I think, is a citizenship thing, right? It's kind of like we like to scratch people's backs who scratch our backs. The more you interact with somebody, the more they'll interact with you. I think part of it too is it makes other people sort of see you as a reciprocitous, reciprocus. Mm-hmm. Let's go with reciprocitous. No, don't do that. They see you as a person who is reciprocal. I'm getting closer. And that's really important too. I mean, the thing about social media is that unlike our face-to-face interactions, is everybody else is observing not just how you react to them, but also how you react to other people. And so how much social exchanging you're doing, right, is going to help you. But it really is a I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. My husband always talks about he likes putting he likes investing dollars in the emotional bank account, right? And so he likes things, he comments on things every chance he gets. And I know you can't comment on everything. And honestly, the more successful you get as a social media strategist, the harder that this gets. And you'll notice, for instance, that, you know, celebrities and micro celebrities have a hard time being really showing a lot of reciprocity because there's too much. But have you ever noticed that even when you see some of them do a little bit of it, it really makes you think better of them? I think the same thing happens for you. Um, if you are trying to, for instance, get your Twitter account off the ground, it helps to give a little. Now, there actually is, and I'm not going to get into it, maybe for your final paper, this is something you'd want to look into, though. There have been some interesting studies on the ratio of, for instance, followers to followees you want to have. You never want to look on social media like somebody who gives so much without getting any who gives too much without getting anything in return. There's actual empirical evidence that, yeah, it kind of, I mean, it's kind of like social. It kind of makes you look like a loser, right? There's a sweet spot, but people who are not, who have none of this, really aren't using the platform to the best of its ability, right? So there is social exchange there. Okay, the next one, we've got brevity, reciprocity. Now authenticity, right? Can I do this? Authenticity. So this actually does relate to your reading. So that Marwick and Boyd reading talked a lot about authenticity. And authenticity is something I love to talk about because it's fake. There's no such thing as authenticity. Well, there is, but not on social media. So one of my favorite parts about the article you read is, you know, Marwick and Boyd talk a lot about how people didn't like thinking about their imagined audience, right? Like if part of what they were trying to do is try to figure out, like, oh, when you guys post something on Twitter, what kind of audience do you have in mind, right? And some people were like, what do you mean? I don't have any audience in mind. I just tweet honestly and I tweet passionately. That was the name of the title. And I am who I am. Yeah, BS, right? I mean, they kind of imply it in the article, and I kind of agree. You don't have to agree with it. But I think they make a really compelling point that why would you be posting if you didn't have some sort of audience in mind? And as we know, you know, we've discussed, you know, Goffman's dramaturgical model and how everybody's really always sort of navigating impression management. They're always thinking about somebody watching them unless you're completely alone. And nobody's alone on social media. You wouldn't be posting if there wasn't some audience that you had in mind. People tend not to be great at understanding who the actual audience is. There's no way to actually know, right? You never know who's lurking or who's looking. But when we're formulating what we're going to say, what we're going to post, what content we're not going to post, those types of things, we're always thinking about who could potentially see it. And that does affect, right, how we choose to display things. In that way, I think this is their point, nothing's truly authentic, right? Authenticity at the end of the day is not something like you can never show all of yourself. It doesn't mean that it's fake, right? It doesn't mean that if I only show this part of me, or I craft this part of me to give a good impression in front of my imagined audience, that it's dishonest or disingenuous. Not necessarily, right? It could just, back to Goffman, it could just be one piece of my identity that I'm showing. Having said that, there's really no such thing as real authenticity. We still, when we were trying to formulate this list of what makes you, how to be likable, we put authenticity down there because one thing that people do love is feeling like you're authentic, I mean, I'm going to use this video as an example right now. And I think this happened earlier in the semester, like I got a phone call, right? And I picked it up and it was a genuine, authentic moment, okay? Because it was. And you got to see a little piece of me, and it felt like you were seeing like some backstage behavior of mine. And you were. I can't remember. I think it was you guys. I've done a couple videos, but like earlier in the semester, my husband called and I'm like, hey, I'm doing a video, right? That's an authentic moment, and social media is all about that. But the reason I'm saying it's not real authenticity is because I, at the end of the day, did decide to pick that up, right? Maybe it still would have been authentic if I would have let it ring, and it wouldn't. The point is you're always making these deliberate decisions. Everything's sort of for show. Now, it would have been less authentic if I had had my husband call at that moment to give that impression. You wouldn't have known that, though, would you? My point is that appearing authentic. Social media, right? We don't mind spelling mistakes or things like that. We don't want things to be too glossy, right? We want to give the impression that we're raw, we're showing a true side of ourselves, even if it's not true. Think about YouTube videos in general, right? It's not, we don't like the squeaky clean videos. We like videos where we can see what somebody's basement looks like and things like that. So you want, even if there's no such thing as authenticity, if the use of social media in general, because you're being so strategic, takes away from your ability to be authentic, you still want to try to give the impression of authenticity, which again is the least authentic thing you could do. I know this is a confusing concept, and I'm looking at the time right now and I'm realizing I could go on and on and on about it. If it's confusing to you though, let me know, we can talk about it, because I understand it's a contradiction. But I do think the Boyd and Marwick article does a pretty good job with that too. Okay, consistency. This one's easier. One thing that we think is super important is making sure that you are consistent. This, I think, has to do with both timing issues and branding issues. We had talked a lot about consistency in terms of the impression that you give. Now, you could have lots of impressions, right? A lot of you have this semester, when we've talked about what you want your self-brand to be, could mention, 3 or 4 adjectives. And so it's not inconsistent if you are trying to convey those 3 or 4 adjectives, however you want people to describe you, over and over again. It's inconsistent if you do something that contradicts them, right? So, if your brand is, squeaky clean homemaker type, and, you post a goth post. I don't know what I'm thinking. Goth. I like The Cure. Okay. So it would be weird if I was trying to come across as a squeaky clean person and posting pictures of The Cure. The Cure from the 80s. Some of you will. Some of you definitely won't. He wears black eyeliner and he's known to be goth, right? It would just be brand inconsistent. So there's those types of things. But consistency also refers to time. You want to make sure that you're sort of have for your ambient awareness, right? Posting at consistent times in the day. It doesn't have to be perfect, not all the time, but there should be some sort of reliability to your social media presence. You know, I mentioned the chicken chick in like a couple videos ago. She does post at different. She goes on Facebook Live and she goes at different times, but more or less she is pretty consistent. I always know that she's going to go collect the eggs in the afternoon. So there are those types of things too. The reason it makes you more likable, in some ways it just makes you more accessible. People know when to find you, they know what to expect. And again, I think it goes back to both the type of brand consistency you want to create, but also that sense of ambient awareness that we've talked about, which is important to cultivate, right? It gives people a sense of your routine and your timing and things like that. Finally, the last one is engagement, which I think if you must know, we only we chose to go with the word engagement because it allowed us to spell the word brace. We needed a word so it would be easier to remember, but there's engagement down there. So engagement just means that you have to actually use social media. And I actually do not follow this. Some of you guys may have noticed that I had a Twitter account that I haven't touched in years and years and years. The truth is, I should probably delete the Twitter account because, in my opinion, it's I don't do what I say, not what I do. Do what I say, not what I do. I think about these things a lot. I just don't. I'm an academic. What do I need a social media presence for? Blasphemy! I know. No, but the truth is it's very bad. When we talked about engagement, we really did talk about it's like you just need to be present, right? If you want to have a likable presence, the first thing is diving in. You need to be posting on a regular basis. It could have to do with engaging with other people. Again, I think that's kind of overlaps with the reciprocity principle or whatever, but yeah. Okay, so that's the brace: brevity, reciprocity, authenticity, consistency, and engagement. The only other thing that we had debated putting on here, which relates to the other reading that you had, was positivity. And it was actually that reading that started to change my mind on this because, you know, that study was all about how just like we have injunctive norms for appropriate behavior offline, there are injunctive norms about what's appropriate online. And not surprisingly, you know, they overlap a lot. And a norm, by the way, is it's kind of the societal understanding about what's appropriate, right? It overlaps with etiquette and stuff. I mean, it used to be normative for people to smoke indoors, right? It's not anymore. It doesn't mean that people don't, but it's not normative anymore. It's not something we expect to see. Taboos tend to be violations of social norms, if that gives you an idea. But it can be on that larger level of like that's a taboo, or it can just be like kind of how you expect people to act. And you know, those types of rules, if you will, those societal rules are powerful and they do shape our behavior. So this article was talking about how there has tended to be this norm of positivity on social network sites. And you know, I don't, even though their study, if you haven't read it yet, they kind of find that, yeah, there is a norm of positivity, but it's, and my interpretation is it's really not that bad. Like there can be negativity posted on social network sites for sure, regardless of the platform. It does tend to skew more. We expect people to just put positive things there. And honestly, I think that's why you may have read different criticisms of just the sort of the social media era we're living in where, you know, people get depressed because they log onto their social network sites and through social comparison, they think, oh, everything is so much better. Like this person has it so much better and everything's going really well for them. And then we tend to criticize and we're like, oh, well, of course that person acts like everything's positive or what. But the truth is we all do that. And that's what this article is about. It's kind of saying it is a taboo for people to express a lot of negative affect, a lot of negative emotion on social network sites. And relatively speaking, I think that's true. But I wouldn't say it's like necessarily, you know, even if it is more normative to express positive things on social network site platforms, especially like Instagram, which is public and really all about just showing people pretty things. Less so on WhatsApp, which isn't really surprising, right? Because WhatsApp is more private. So it doesn't really matter if you post negative. I mean, let me back up a second. you know, I think one of the reasons we don't like, we have this positivity bias is because we tend to think that people are dysfunctional if they are disclosing negative things and we don't know them very well, right? If you know someone, it's not so taboo to like, you know, share negative things or air your dirty laundry. But if you don't know people, it's really weird when they're up in, you know, your face sharing all of their sad stories. Social media is a, you know, a whole network of a bunch of people who you don't know that well. So they don't want to hear about your, they don't want to hear about your business. You know what I'm saying? Um, but again, I think there's a lot of gray area in this, and this study started digging that out a little bit. It didn't do a great job, in my opinion, because I think that there's a huge difference between sadness and anger, right? I see anger expressed on social network sites all the time, and I don't think there's much of a taboo around it at all. Having said that, I still do not want to put it as a, you know, as one of the things to make you more likable, because I don't know if it has that effect. But I think whether or not it's going to help people engage with you is a different question from how it's going to make them engage with you. I'm blabbering now, but the only thing I did want you to think about was just in terms of when you're thinking about. I guess it kind of goes with your brand, but it also in terms of what kind of engagement you want to elicit. I think that study has a lot of interesting implications for thinking about what type of content you want to post. And that sets us up, and then I swear to God, this will be the last thing I say right now. That sets us up for the last 3 weeks in the class, where we're going to be talking about specific content attributions that doesn't just make people like things, but actually might make people want to share things, so that you can start thinking about the types of content you want to share in order to get other people involved in sharing the things that are important to you, whether it's professional oriented content, things that you want to sell, or just personal things that you think the world should know. So that's it. I cannot believe this was so long. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Better luck next time.